Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's one-week diplomatic tour of Africa, his first trip to the continent since assuming office, is seen as a chance to reaffirm Japan's role in the region and stimulate private investment amid growing Chinese and Russian influence. On landing in Egypt, the Prime Minister tweeted and said, amid the foundation of the international order being shaken, I will deepen discussions with each leader, confirm cooperation and connect this to the G7 Hiroshima summit, which Japan is sharing. With this in mind, what is Japan looking to gain from his outreach program? Let's now talk to Dr. Satoru Nagao, a fellow at Hudson Institute, who is joining us from Tokyo, Japan. Dr. Satoru, welcome to We on Wild is One.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Let's begin with the current Kishida's trip to Africa. Some critics say it's a bit too late for Japan to counter-influence in the region, considering China's expansive reach. Russia, France, and also the United States have also toured the continent. What would you say Japan's scramble has really slipped behind?
Yes, Africa is far from Japan, that's true. But at the same time, Japan focusing on the global south now. The Foreign Minister meeting of the G7 has happened this month, and their session indicates what Japan want to do. There are the many sessions: the African session, Afghanistan Central Asia session, Iran's Middle East session, Ukraine session, Indo-Pacific session. Especially the Indo-Pacific session, important of the cooperate with India is clearly mentioned in the statement. So now Japan is focusing on global south countries, including Africa. That's why Prime Minister Kishida visited many countries in the global south. So now the Foreign Minister also visited Latin America, and Prime Minister Kishida visited Africa. But before he visited Africa, he visited India and Ukraine and other countries. Indeed, in the global south, there is a need. The price of the food, price and of the energy is rising. So, because of Russia...
Doctor, we'll talk about the global south a little bit later. I want us to focus first on Africa. Do you think that the Prime Minister's trip to Africa will bear any fruit and will change the influence that Russia has had in Africa, China has had in Africa? What do you think?
Japan alone, the influence is limited, that's true. But Japan cooperate with other countries, especially India or the European countries or United States. That's why Japan's presence is also important in Africa. Japan has the skill, know-how to build the infrastructure or support something, the civil purpose project. For a long time, Japan has the skill to support the developing countries. So in this case, if India's know-how, knowledge is about Africa, or traditionally EU shows influence in Africa, the US can show the presence of the military. So combine of these support of these countries, Japan's support will be influential. So Japan alone is not so, but Japan can show with other partners.
Okay, influential, as you say, Doctor. The G7 is an informal bloc of industrialized democracies, the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom. But experts are increasingly questioning the group's relevance. Some say it should expand to include other countries like India and some countries in Africa. Do you agree? Where do you think the grouping is headed?
Under the current situation, what kind of the multinational framework is most influential? In the United Nations, the US fight with China or Russia, and so United Nations cannot show the leadership. In this case, G7, framework G7, it's a very influential multinational framework. Of course, India is presidency of the G20. That is also important. But at the same time, currently the influence of the G7 or decision of G7 is influential to the world. But at the same time, the influence of the G7 is declining. without support from global south countries, G7 cannot show enough level of impact. That's why G7 must focusing on global south. That's why Japan focusing on the cooperation with global south countries, and especially Japan's friend, important friend is India. So we try to cooperate with India, and in Africa, South Pacific, Latin America, any places in the world, Japan try to cooperate with India.
Doctor, experts say it has been very difficult for African countries to understand what Japan really wants from them. One, because of their reactive rather than proactive approach with their policies. Another issue is Japanese foreign direct investment stock in sub-Saharan Africa has dropped significantly, plummeting to $6.1 billion in 2021. So what can the Prime Minister do to regain the trust from Africans, you think?
Last December 2022, Japan published a national security strategy. In this document, there is a sign related with ODA, Official Development Assistance. We will use this money as a strategic purpose. So in the past, Japan just supports the people, local people, to develop infrastructure. But many projects Japan wasted indeed because Japan lacks knowledge. In some cases, even if we build the infrastructure, local people do not continue to use. So that's why this year, even if the money is size of the money is declining, but we will use more effectively. Japan's project is workable because this skill is based on many failures in the past. So Japan's project is workable. This is different with China. China can support this country by using the ample budget, but their project is not workable. Japan's project is workable. That's why for local people, Japan is better than China. That's confidence to say.
Okay. Doctor, do you think the Prime Minister under the stewardship of the G7 achieved anything from the recent trip to Ukraine?
This visiting Ukraine is very important because most of the other G7 countries except Japan, all of the G7 countries except Japan have already visited the Kyiv. So if the Japan will take the role of chairman of the G7, of course Japan should show their presence in Kyiv. But at the same time, this Kyiv visit is very important for Japan's diplomacy because for a long time, Japan do not intervene in any war-related, conflict-related situation. Right. So, but this time, cooperate with India, cooperate with Poland, cooperate with Ukraine. He visited the capital under the war. So that is the reason Japan start to show their presence in the security arena in the world. As a symbolic gesture and more practical courageous, Japan shows a presence. That is very important step.
All right. Finally, Doctor, as Japan will progressively reach the status of middle power, we are now approaching a new phase where it needs to formulate a new strategic policy that could enhance its presence in Africa. With that being said, what approach should the Prime Minister use on Africa?
Of course, Japan's support is workable, I mentioned, and this is very important aspect. So with other partners, Japan can take important role. For example, if India and Japan cooperate, if India lacks enough budget or skill to support the African countries, Japan can provide. But Japan lacks the knowledge, and India can provide the knowledge about Africa. India has a community in Africa, and they have enough knowledge how to deal with the local community. India has a law, and Japan do not have enough skill and knowledge. So cooperate with India, cooperate with the EU, cooperate with America, cooperate with others, but not China and Russia. Japan's presence will spread in Africa and support local people in Africa. That is maybe what Japan want to do.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Satoru Nagao, for all your inputs and for talking to WION World is One today.
Thank you very much.